Alka Joshi, the New York Times bestselling author of The Henna Artist, published in March 2020, is on a roll with the book now on its way to becoming a Netflix series. Add to that her having just published the third and final novel in her Jaipur trilogy, The Perfumist of Paris, and already on to a fourth new novel, and you get a measure of how rapidly she has gained international fame. The second in the trilogy, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, was published in June 2021. Joshi started writing at the relatively late age of 51, but says she wouldn't have been able to produce the trilogy in her 20s, 30s, or even 40s without the experience age has given her and brought with it an ever broadening literary and intellectual horizon. The Perfumist of Paris, according to its blurb, takes readers to the 1970s Paris, where Radha's budding career as a perfumer must compete with the demands of her family and the secrets of her past. Alka Joshi spoke to Mayank Chhaya reports from Monterey, California, where she lives. Okay, your third novel in the Jaipur trilogy, The Perfumist of Paris, sounds quite fragrant, as it were. What was your association with fragrances in how they are created before writing the novel?
So I think that every person who has been born in South Asia or lived any time in South Asia understands that there are so many fragrances that are completely that we are completely inundated with, right? From the moment we're born, we are smelling the curries that are being made in the kitchen. We are smelling garlic and onions and cumin and turmeric. And then there are the external scents, like the petrol of the cars, and then the cow and what the cow is eating on the street. And then, of course, there are the fragrances coming from the temples, the sandalwood, vetiver, So I think that for Radha, who is our protagonist in The Perfumist of Paris, it's very natural for her to fall into the world of perfumery. She is already able to discern so many scents. And to be in the world of perfume, to create perfume, you need to be able to have an innate ability to do that, to even memorize a lot of scents. So this is why I thought it was natural for Radha to go into that world. She had already demonstrated in the Henna Artist that she could mix all of the ingredients required to make a beautiful and silky henna paste. And so, because she's been able to do that already, it was natural for her to also put together the paints of the old man in the village. And when she had an opportunity to work in Antoine's perfumery in Paris, she jumped at it. It was something she could do. It was something she was a natural at.
It's interesting you should mention the henna artist because I was about to ask you that in that novel, henna, of course, is something which is tactile. You touch it, you pick it up, you can feel it in your palms. And she graduates to something that wafts away perfume. It's there, but it's not there. It's an interesting transition for her. I was just trying to make a point. There's no question for this. It just struck me as I was talking to you.
What an interesting observation. I had never even thought about it that way. But I think here's another way to look at it. With the mehndi, the henna, what's happening is that the way that Lakshmi used to do that for women, it was a way for them to realize their desires. So their desires were front and center
Right.
on their hands, on their bodies, wherever it is that she applied the mehndi. But I think that what was really happening is that they were able to accomplish whatever it was they wanted because they felt like their desires were revealed on their bodies. And I think that Radha is doing something very similar with scent because she is, for each woman, finding a scent or finding a fragrance or combination of fragrances that also speak to that woman's desire and that woman's want and needs. So I actually think that those two sisters are doing the same thing, but in very different ways.
Right. The olfactory is a very crucial part of human existence that straddles the instinct for survival at the very basic primal level, and then the instinct for romance at a slightly loftier level. What was the starting point for you to understand this very primal sense?
What's interesting is there are scents that I love, and they are from my childhood. So I do love sandalwood. I do love cardamom, and I do love the smell of onions and garlic cooking. They make my mouth water immediately. I think that there are these primal associations that we have with the scents that we remember from childhood or a certain memory. In fact, I think scents evoke memories. They make us remember things that we didn't, that maybe we hadn't, thought about in a while. Um, and I think that fragrance, um, the way that Radha is working on them, are evoking memories in these women. They are very, as you said, primal. They are inciting not only desire, but they are making the women complete. For example, when she finds that fragrance for Sheila, when she is working at Antoine's perfumery, and she is picking out a scent that is perfect for that particular woman who has walked in. Um, she is uh, she is looking for a fragrance that describes that woman, not necessarily what that woman is aiming for, like whether she wants to seduce her husband or a lover, or whether she wants to make an impression on people, but really a scent that describes that particular woman's personality.
Let's make Radha real for the sake of argument here. She's surrounded by a myriad of fragrances. What do you think would be her favorite eventually?
Oh, okay. That's a very interesting question too, and I think that it's actually in the book itself.
Okay.
Radha had a child when she was 13, and that was from the Henna Artist. That was when she was 13, and a very rebellious sister to Lakshmi. She wanted to make her own way in this world, which Lakshmi wasn't hearing, and so she got involved with a wealthy young man, and who was older than her and knew better, but she ended up getting pregnant. And now Radha is in Paris. She is married to a Parisian. She has two little girls, and she is 32 years old in 1974. Because of her circumstances now that are so different from when she was 13 and had no power in her life. Now she realizes that everything that happens, it has a consequence. Everything that happens is a result of whatever she has been putting into motion. And she has responsibilities. She has children. She has a husband. She has a job. And she has a job that she absolutely loves. She has grown more and more and more involved in the world of perfumery. And now her goal is to become a master perfumer. To become a master perfumer, normally you need a chemistry degree. There's a lot of chemistry involved, interactions between ingredients. And Radha does not have that. She hasn't been able to go back to school and do that. But she's working in a lab. And for as many years as she worked at Antoine's perfumery, finding the right fragrances for the customers who walked in, and as many years as she has worked in the lab, she actually has about 8 or 9 years of experience that she can lend to the world of her company, the House of Eve. And her boss, Delphine Silberman, does understand that Radha has not only the ability to do this job, but she also has the experience now to do this job. So I think that Radha, because of the baby that she had all those years ago, and the baby that she has always regretted having to give up, combine that with the knowledge that she had of creating fragrances, her favorite fragrance is of that baby. what she remembers from his scent, that kind of milky scent that children have. But every baby has a particular scent, just like you and I have
Right.
our own peculiar scent. And she has put that in a little vial that she keeps around her neck on a necklace all the time. And that is the scent that reminds her that she had this baby, even though she does everything she possibly can to not think about that child. Still, she keeps that little amulet.
Right. I'm curious to know what kind of preparations slash research that you immerse yourself into, especially in terms of creating fragrances, because it is, like you said, it's a scientific world. At the end of the day, these are all chemicals that come together and create various scents. Tell me a bit about it. What you did to achieve that level of sort of finesse in writing.
I was having lunch with the producer of the Henna Artist TV series. I was down in LA and he said, "What are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on the third book, which is about perfume, and I really need to learn about perfume." So he said, "Oh, I know exactly whom you should speak to. She's in New York City, and she is a major force behind all these amazing perfumes like J'adore and
Oh,
CK1 and Eternity. And, she will really be able to direct you." So I got a hold of her. I flew out to New York City. I met her for lunch. She brought a master perfumer with her. He is really well known in the field, and they answered a lot of my questions. I told her I really wanted to visit a perfume lab, so she got me into one of the biggest perfume labs, and that informed me about what Radha is doing in her lab, what the lab looks like. They haven't really changed in 70 years. They look almost exactly the same. Each lab assistant has their own space, and then they have all these vials and vials and vials of different scents around them. And so I knew right away that this is how Radha is working. The other thing I learned from that experience is that the master perfumers memorize 2 to 3,000 scents in their nose. And when they are able to do that, they don't even need the vials in front of them in order to create a fragrance. They can actually say, "I want zero point zero 0.03 grams of this or zero point zero 0.00 milliliters of that." And, let's combine all of those into a scent. They send that formula down to the lab, and then the lab assistants actually blend these vials and then send them back up. And this process goes on multiple times before the master perfumer says, "I think this is the scent I was looking for." Then the people in New York City told me to go to Paris. So then I flew to Paris. I talked to master perfumers there, both in the small boutique firms and in the large companies. And everybody was so generous with their time and their attention. Uh, and I couldn't believe how many people just spend an hour or two with me just saying, "Okay, this is what you need to know about fragrances and what goes into fragrances." And then they said, in order to get the complete picture, you need to go to Grasse in the southeastern part of France. It used to be known as the perfume capital of the world. So there, the actual small vials of perfume that the master perfumer has deemed perfect are compounded into large batches. And those are then going to be bottled in Grasse. Many of the bottles are actually designed in Grasse because, as you know, every single perfume out there has their own signature bottle that they need to create. So then those people in Cross said, "I think you need to go to Lisbon. They recommended a couple of different perfumers there I should talk to." One of them was an Indian woman who has, lived all over the world. And she's very interested in bringing Indian scents into the global sphere. So that's what she's working on creating. And then the other person I had to talk to was Yves Duchichy, whose family has been in the perfume industry for over 200 years. And when you go to Grasse, so many of the street names are their last name.
right.
And even though Yves no longer works in the industry, he's 85 years old, so he's been retired for a while. He had worked in Paris in the industry uh, at the same time that Radha is there. So I wanted to know what that was like. And he told me about, how hedonistic it was at that time, and how, the perfume industry was really run by men, as are most industries even today. And it was very difficult for women to become master perfumers. So then I knew that Radha's, rise would be difficult unless she had a mentor. And her mentor then turned out to be somebody else, modeled after somebody else that Eve told me about.
I see.
And that woman was Sophia Grossman, who was a smoker, like she was chain smoking, chain smoking. And I said, Eve, how would a woman who is chain smoking, or anybody who's chain smoking, be able to design perfume? I thought it ruined your scent. And he said, everybody smoked in the 70s. Well, you couldn't
Right.
go anywhere without people smoking. So I think we all just got used to it. And also, Sophia was a master perfumer, so she could design perfumes without even smelling anything in her nose. So then Delphine Silbermann, who is Radha's mentor and boss, is modeled after that woman. And Delphine also smokes like a fiend.
Oh, well, that's quite a story. I'm sure you're aware that India has a millennial tradition of scents and perfumes. In fact, they're intrinsic to Indian culture in many ways. Did you draw on that aspect at all while making Radha into a master perfumer?
Absolutely. Radha already has an innate sense for fragrances, but she's assigned a project and she knows that she is missing some kind of ingredient. So, what does she do? She calls Lakshmi and says, Lakshmi, I'm working on this project. I can't figure out what to do. And Lakshmi says, why don't you come on down here? We've got those courtesans, the same ones who taught me the art of henna. Are people who really know fragrances, because they have their entire house is permeated with fragrance,
Right. Yeah.
and they also use fragrances to seduce their patrons. So why not, come on down here? We'll go to the house of the courtesans. And in India, with the courtesans, she finds exactly the ingredient she is looking for. The other thing that happens is that when she's in India, she finds out how much she misses being there. She misses the melange of scents that she doesn't have in Paris. Paris's labs have a very sterile environment. And being in India, surrounded by scents, gives her that sense that, all the raw ingredients that she's been working with are coming from the Asian subcontinent, from the Indian subcontinent. So why wouldn't she, be able to work in India as well? And I think that finding out that so many of those scents came from India, so many of those natural ingredients like sandalwood and the damask flowers, the roses, the jasmine, the vetiver, all of these kinds of things, oh, cinnamon, cloves, they come from the Indian subcontinent. And when I found that out, I thought, wait a second, why isn't India known as a perfume capital of the world? I mean, as you said, for millennia,
Yeah.
Indians have been using scent to adorn themselves, to perfume their homes, to seduce and entice and attract and, just make themselves be more pleasant in an environment. And why isn't India known for that? So I think part of why I even unconsciously wanted to talk about perfume is because I'm always in each of my books wanting to promote India, wanting to
Right.
promote the kinds of things that India has contributed to the world. I often think that India needs a good PR
Indeed,
department.
it does. The idea of itra that itra is essentially oil based. So you don't spray it, you just put it here or put a bit of a cotton in your ear. I remember my uncle and father, and they all used to have a little cotton sticking out. Later, I discovered that they had dipped it in itra, and it would just keep giving that fragrance all day. That was the plan.
My
But
my father remembers the same thing. My
I,
father, who is 93, yes, he was telling me that too.
Yeah, but the atomizer, the way you spray it, I think it obviously it came from the West, but Indians, that's why they had the oil-based itra. And take any kingdom, Mughals or Rajputs or anywhere, they were all surrounded by fragrances all the time. The Wajid Ali Shah of Lucknow
was notorious, celebrated for, he was obsessed with fragrances. In fact, I personally used to be called Wajid Ali Shah because I was surrounded by all kinds of fragrances. Anyway, I digressed. The courtesans of Agra that you write about, theirs is a world of fragrance, lust, and romance. How did you get into that world as a writer?
Um, it's really interesting. I'm not quite sure where that came from. My mother was born in Agra, and one of the last visits that she and I made together before she died to India is we went to Agra. We went to her ancestral home. We went to her school where she went to school. And I think in that trip, I learned something about how the courtesans were very much prevalent in Agra, where a lot of Muslims live, and
Right.
many of the courtesans were Muslim. In fact, the Muslim women are the ones who were allowed to be in the movies, who were allowed to dance, who were allowed to um, be, you know, be different than the Hindu women. The Hindu women were often kept more at home and sheltered, and so on. Uh, so it was, I just went on a quest to learn more about them, to do some research about them. And what I found was fascinating how liberated they were as women. They were more geishas than they
Right.
were prostitutes. Uh,
Indeed.
they were schooled in the classical arts of poetry and dance and music. I mean, they were very well educated, and they entertained men when they came of an evening to spend time at the Haveli. They they entertained them by playing music for them, reciting poetry, which used to be a lot more common as a form of entertainment than it is now.
Right.
And so, they would relax the men, but the men would go home happy. They were drinking there and so on. It was it was such a female run household that when the courtesans had children from any of the men that they might have slept with, the man was responsible for taking care of them, and they became his second family. But when they had daughters, the daughters could stay in the house and they could be educated by the house. They could have private tutors and so on, and they could decide for themselves whether they wanted a life as a courtesan or not. The boys that they had, the sons, had to somehow leave when they got of age. When they were of age, they had to
Right.
leave the house. They could not stay. They had to determine things for themselves. The daughters inherited all the property and the money. Now, this was also fascinating
It is. Yeah.
because many of the courtesans were very wealthy. Not only did they have money from the patrons who came every night, night after night, to be entertained, but they also owned factories and businesses. They invested wisely. And so when the 1857 mutiny came around, these same courtesans, not just in Agra, but all over the country, they helped finance that mutiny. But the mutiny was not successful. And when the British found out that their money had gone towards that, they started labeling them as common prostitutes. That was not something that they were labeled before. So that really destroyed their reputation. And for some of the courtesans, that really meant that their houses had to be shut down because people were no longer coming because
Right.
of that reputation. But some of the houses survived, persisted. And then when the 1947 independence movement came around, they also once again helped finance that movement. I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude to these courtesans, and I don't think many people know about them. I personally think that they are, an amazing group of people that we need to explore further.
There is a book sitting right there for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I talk about them in The Perfumist of Paris
Yeah.
because one of the things that they show Radha is another way to think about
Right.
fragrance creation.
Right.
And if you go to YouTube and you see any of the ways in which Kannauj is known as the fragrance capital in India, if you see their industry around fragrance.
Right.
You see how organic it is, how of the earth it is. And it's so much closer to how fragrances are actually created in this world than the sterile labs in the Western world.
True, true, absolutely. Yeah. Radha's world is appended by her son in India that she never told her husband about. And you tell us that he's headed for Paris. My interest is something else. When you append a character's life, especially when she's on a cusp of a breakthrough, uh, what goes through your mind as a writer? Because you are really, in a sense, completely disturbing or, in a sense, destroying her the status quo life at that point.
What's going through my mind is that I think we all have those moments in our lives where our lives are upended, whether it's, let's say, something as simple as getting married or having a baby. Our lives completely change in a moment, or we leave from one place to another for a new job. Or as somebody in our life dies who was very important to us. We all go through these kinds of changes, and I love exploring what happens to people when, what direction do they take? Do they change their lives completely as a result? Do they go in another direction completely? Or do they try to mend whatever it is that's fallen apart? I find that sort of process really fascinating, and I like to explore that with my characters. But Mike, it's not really even me exploring it, it's my characters exploring it. I cannot tell you how many times my characters determine for themselves what they're going to do. I'm not doing it. I didn't, for example, lay out the Perfumist of Paris from page 1 to page 300 to say, okay, now Radha's going to do this. Okay, now she's going to do that. And then this is going to happen. And that's going to happen. I don't even know. For instance, and I don't want to give out a spoiler, but the person who actually commissioned the project that encourages Radha to go down to India, I didn't know who that person was going to be until we got to like page 250. And there were so many things I didn't know. I didn't know, for example, that she was going to go to India and talk to these courtesans. And I didn't know what the courtesans were going to show her and how that trip to India does serve as a catalyst for her to change her life.
Right.
So, it's a fascinating thing as a writer to have your characters live so fiercely in your mind that they control the narrative instead of you controlling the narrative.
It's interesting because you are discovering simultaneously with the characters, right? It's a parallel process. You don't know, they don't know, and you both discover something that was maybe a surprise or an unpleasant surprise, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
With the trilogy out of your system now, where are you in terms of your literary mindscape?
I am working on books number 4 and 5, which we have a contract for with HarperCollins. And I miss the characters. Well, that's not really true. They're always with me. The characters of the trilogy are always with me. And I think they will with me forever. They will be with me forever. They also live in the minds of my readers who are constantly saying, can you do another book with all of these same characters? But I kind of felt that the trilogy was over. And so I didn't want to reprise these characters. I do, however, still want to explore the idea of all of the contributions that India has made to the world. So I'm still on my PR mission.
Okay.
And so I'm still writing about India and in different time zones. I think that there are other authors who are doing a great job of writing about India today.
Right.
But I like to hearken back to what India used to be, because I think a lot of people have misperceptions about the India of yesterday.
Right.
And I think that, frankly, the Western world has done a lot to denigrate India of yesterday. And I want to explore the positive side of that.
I'm sure any trilogy leaves large remnants of the fictional worlds that you create. How do you dismantle that world to move on to something new?
Oh, you mean how do I proceed from the trilogy to something brand new?
Yes, but little beyond that, you, in your mind at least, you have to begin to forget the world that you created in the trilogy. In a
No,
sense, you
no, I actually don't. I don't. No, I actually don't. For in my mind, that it's compartmentalized. In my mind,
okay. That's what I
the
was trying to
characters,
get at. Yeah, okay.
yeah, characters of the trilogy live in this space over here, and the new project is in this space over here. Um, I think it's like anything else, right? So let's say I am working for a company. My work for the company is over here. My family is over here. My, activities after work are over here, right? So yeah, it's like that.
But do these worlds leak into one another at some point? I'm sure even compartments have porous areas where things can begin to merge.
Well, so in book number 4, which takes place in 1937, we are in a Bombay hospital. And I'm calling it Bombay because in 1937, that's what it was
Indeed.
called.
Yes.
So we are in this hospital, and there is a doctor who's involved. Now, for some reason, I saw Dr. Kumar as a very young doctor working in the Bombay hospital. Dr. Kumar is a major component of the trilogy, and he's the one that Lakshmi gets involved with. Um, and of course, he's much older. He's in his 40s, mid 40s or so in the trilogy. So I thought, oh, so he's here in 1937. That makes sense because maybe he did his residency in Bombay and then went up to Shimla afterwards. So I'm still wrestling with the idea of whether I want him in book number 4 or
I
not.
see. Okay.
And I may change him into another person entirely. But I kind of like him being there because maybe it's like what you said, the worlds bleeding into one another.
Yes.
Maybe it's just my way of not letting go of the characters of the trilogy.
Yes. Last couple of things. One is you began writing relatively at a late age, 51, right? Now, I was curious to know if, having accumulated all those years of experience, would you have been I mean, it's a speculative question, really. Would you have been a different writer were you writing, say, in your 20s, the same books, essentially the same plot?
I could not have written these books in my 20s, 30s, or 40s. There's no way. I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the life experience. And I was thinking about India in a very different way in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. I was still buying into the concept that India was an underdeveloped country, that India was, at the time of independence, that somehow India needed the British to help govern it. I had just sort of bought into all of that because that's what the Western media always
Right.
promotes, that somehow India is ungovernable, that India is too chaotic. But I also think that India has been around. This is a rich country. It has been around for thousands of years,
Yes.
longer than the Western world has, and we need to respect all of the wisdom that she has given to the world. I could not know that in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. It was only when I started going back to India with my mother and the perspective that she gave me on those trips. And then what I saw in my eyes, that changing perspective. And I realized, oh my gosh, I have been thinking about India all wrong.
Right.
I need to think about it in the way it really was, the way that Indians were looking at it during that time.
Yes.
So my parents were born in the 30s. And then they were alive during the independence movement. My father used to go to the Gandhi marches. And then they were in India after independence and married in 1955 and then raising a family. So who better to tell me about what that trajectory for the country had been like than them? And once I understood that, this whole world opened up for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I need to let other people know also the kind of perspective that I have gained. I need to let them know if they're Indian or even if they're not Indian. They need to know India has brought to this world and how much we owe that country, instead of constantly thinking that she is somehow an albatross around the neck of the world and she needs to be rescued. I don't think India needs to be rescued at all.
Absolutely not. Yeah, agreed, 100%. And finally, to conclude, tell me whatever you can about the Netflix series based on the Henna Artist.
I wish I could tell you something about it, but I'm actually not supposed to talk about it. I do know that Netflix and my producers are very excited, and Frida Pinto is very excited to play Lakshmi. We have had a writer's strike, right, this
Right,
year.
right.
And so, for months now, months and months, we have had a halt on production.
True.
But that is all I can tell you.
No, but in terms of the writing part of it, are you giving your input, or I mean, it's being written by someone else? I know. I just read about it,
Yeah.
but are you consulted in terms of the way the script would flow?
I am consulted sometimes, like when they are at a standstill, when they need to go from one
Okay.
plot point to another, like how would that happen? Or give us some more background of Lakshmi way back in the 1950s when she was still in her village and so on. So they will ask me for those kinds of information to fill out
Okay.
something that they need. But other than that, I am not involved in the
Right.
production.
But the rights were acquired by Reese Witherspoon, right?
No, not at
She
all.
she did not option it.
No, no, no. The rights were acquired by a team of Frida Pinto, her
Oh,
production
oh,
company.
I see. Okay.
Now Michael Edelstein, his production company, and then Miramax TV. So the three of them bought the
Okay.
option as a team, and then they went out and pitched it to all the different streaming companies. They ended up getting 5 offers, which is pretty remarkable, and then Netflix won out.
Okay.